Hello everybody, thank you for joining me here today to discuss the introduction to the visual perceptual evaluation. Before we get started, I just have a couple of disclosures. I have therapy and rehabilitation workbooks published through Bernal, also the Infancy Liaison for New Jersey, as well as a speaker for Shire. So what we're going to be doing today is reviewing visual information processing and going through the visual perceptual testing of the different tests to rule out any kind of visual perceptual deficits, and then finish up with some tips for introducing perceptual therapy into your VT practices. So let's start off with just discussing what visual information processing is. So the quality and efficiency of vision and visual processing have an overwhelming impact on how a person functions in their environment. And the visual system is an information processing unit which facilitates a person's successful analysis and interaction with their surroundings. If we take a look at visual information processing, it can be viewed as a pyramid, which was created by Mary Warren, who is an occupational therapist, and it has a hierarchical model. So we're going to start off at the very tip top. So adaptation through vision, what we use our vision and visual information processing for. So we use our vision to make decisions and to use the information to adapt to the environment. And a person cannot make decisions or adapt to their environment through the information that they gather visually unless they have properly analyzed the visual information. And most of this is done in the prefrontal lobe. If we move down to the second stage, visual cognition, that's the ability to manipulate and integrate visual inputs with other sensor information so that we can gain knowledge, solve problems, formulate plans, and make decisions. And visual cognition or visual analysis cannot occur without an intact visual memory, because while visual analysis is occurring, we must be able to create and to retain a picture of the object or the visual field in our mind. Before an image can be stored in memory, we must be able to recognize the pattern that makes up the image via pattern recognition, or distinguishing a particular object from another and its surroundings, or figure ground. Pattern recognition cannot be performed without proper visual scanning, or saccades, so moving the eyes towards an object of interest in the environment. Visual scanning, or saccades, so using organized search patterns to visually search through the environment, is a product of visual attention. We have automatic or the reflexive level of saccades, so these are protective saccades controlled by the brainstem and activated when there is a sudden appearance of an object in the visual field. And then we have the voluntary level of saccades. These are voluntary saccadic movements that are controlled by the cortex and utilized for gathering information. Our ability to maintain visual focus and visual attention on an object for a period of time is going to determine how the visual input is analyzed in the cortex and is the basis for decision making. So if we don't attend to the visual information, we won't be able to initiate a search for the visual information or pattern recognition. We won't produce visual memory for that image, and so we are not going to be able to use that visual input for making decisions. And then we go down to the very bottom level, so the thing that holds everything else up. So our higher level processing cannot occur unless the cortex is receiving clear and concise visual information from the environment. So this includes our ocular health, our visual acuity, visual fields, ocular motor control, and I'm also going to add in accommodation and binocularity, which are not in the original pyramid scheme. So here we're talking about the difference between eyesight, which is just your visual acuity, being able to see, and vision, your ability to actually use the information that you're seeing and use that to interact with the environment. So even if your ocular and your visual hardware of the eyes, so that's your acuity, your field, accommodation, binocularity, ocular motor, ocular health, if the eye itself is intact, the visual processing software that analyzes everything in the cortex might have a difficulty quickly and efficiently analyzing and utilizing the data that's provided by the hardware. And so you can see that if there is a dysfunction in any of the components of the hardware, the bottom of the pyramid, that is going to make the visual information processing that much more strenuous. So before we do anything else, we need to make sure that that bottom part of the pyramid is nice and sturdy. The skills that are required for proficient visual information processing or to have good software include visual spatial, visual analysis, visual motor integration, visual verbal integration, as well as auditory visual integration. And we're going to be going through all of these step by step. So let's start with visual spatial skills. Visual spatial skills involve the ability to tell where an object, including your own body, is in space, and how objects relate to each other in space, so how your internal and external environment is organized. And they're subdivided into three parts. So we have laterality, which is knowing your own body's right and left. Directionality, knowing other people's or objects right and left, and then bilateral integration is the awareness of both sides of the body and the ability to use both sides separately as well as together, both unilaterally and bilaterally. So if someone has a dysfunction in visual spatial skills, they're going to have deficits in manipulating visual information, so mazes, maps, navigation, difficulty in gross motor function, telling time, right-left confusion, so reading was as saw and vice versa, reversals of letters, difficulty crossing the midline, difficulty with trigonometry and calculus, and so on. For visual analysis is the ability to recall, to locate, to select, to extract, analyze, manipulate relevant visual information. And it's used in differentiating small differences in letters and number recognition, sight word recognition, mathematics, spelling, expression of ideas, being able to see the bigger picture without losing the details, and also remembering visual sequences. So we're going to break down visual analysis into its subcomponents. We have visual discrimination, being able to recognize similarities and differences between images. This is an essential elementary reading skill both for phonics and sight word processing. Form perception or spatial relations, being able to mentally visualize and manipulate an idea. Form constancy, recognizing forms regardless of their orientation. Figure ground, being able to locate and identify an item within a busy background without confusion. Visual attention and attention span. So visual attention is the ability to select and attend to a subset of visual information for more in-depth processing. So this is simultaneous processing of multi-elemental displays. So what is relevant, what is irrelevant in your visual field. And then your attention span is the number of letters or the visual information that you can take in and accurately process in just one look. Visual memory is the ability to recognize or recall characteristics from a previously seen image. Visualization is being able to spontaneously envision an image in one's mind and then to manipulate it, and this is the most highly developed form of visual memory. Visual closure, being able to visualize the whole image when only one incomplete part of the image is seen. Visual sequencing, being able to perceive, organize, and remember a specific order. So all of these different components are included in visual analysis. So if you have difficulties in anything with visual analysis, the child or your patient is going to have a lot of difficulties in school. So with visual discrimination, for example, there's going to be confusion of letters, shapes, objects, difficulty with money identification, matching and sorting objects, dressing, just matching shoes and socks, discriminating between sizes of letters and objects. For form perception and spatial relationships, difficulties are going to show up in spatial concepts like in, out, up, down, in front of, reversals of symbols and right-left reversals, poor sight vocabulary, losing your place in the page, attending to a task. For form constancy, being able to recognize letters or numbers when they're in different styles or fonts, difficulty mastering the alphabet and numbers, differentiating between similar letters, looking at objects from an angle and knowing that it's the same object from a different angle. For figure ground, the child might have a difficulty pulling out shapes from a background or from the board or from a book, sorting and organizing, attending to a word on a printed page, misformed letters and uneven spacing when they're writing, or just even finding a friend in the playground. For visual attention and attention span, it's going to affect slow reading, mistaking words with similar beginnings, reading comprehension, counting, moving from a task before actually finishing, that task and moving over to a different one. For visual memory and visualization, reproducing any figures from memory, copying things down, replicating information, reading comprehension, recalling, sight words, navigation, maps, all of those are going to be a difficulty. For visual sequencing and sequential memory, seeing things in the correct order, so this is spelling, counting, arithmetic, recalling what is read, copying, reading comprehension, remembering the order of events, forgetting assignments, and forgetting steps in instructions. For visual closure, these kids are going to have difficulty in spelling, sight word recognition, writing, any puzzles, dot-to-dot worksheets, geometry, leaving out entire parts of words when they're reading or when they're writing. So that was your visual analysis skills. For visual motor integration, that is the coordination of the visual processes and your motor skills. So integrating the visual information with your fine motor movements or your eye-hand coordination. So the eyes see and then they tell the body what to do. So if there's difficulty with visual motor integration, the patient is going to have difficulties with reversals, transpositions, writing within the lines, misorganization, their pencil grip, writing posture, cutting, tying their shoes, things like that. For visual verbal integration, this is when you see it and you need to say it. So we have two different aspects here. We have the speed of rapid automated naming, so RAN. This is the ability to accurately and efficiently call out a list of presented visual stimuli. So you see something and you just read it out and you say it as fast as you can. And then we have the expressive language, so being able to recognize the visual symbols as written word and then quickly and accurately retrieving their sound, their label, and their meaning. So this is actual reading as opposed to just calling out what you're saying. So if a child has difficulty in visual verbal integration, they're going to have slow and disjointed reading, getting lost in the text, letter identification, word recognition, and reading comprehension. For your auditory visual integration, this is where you hear it and then you need to match it or write it down. So being able to identify an auditory stimulus as a visual representation. So you hear diff and then you need to be able to match that sound to the letters that actually compose that sound. So if a child has difficulty with auditory visual integration, they're going to have difficulty learning the alphabet, sound symbol association, spelling, reading speed, and following verbal directions. All right, so almost everything we do during the day, as we can see from the previous examples, requires some sort of degree of perceptual ability for both quick and efficient performance. And if a child is struggling in school, especially if their development, their ocular health, visual acuity, accommodation, magnitude and stamina, binocularity, ocular motor function are all intact, then a visual perceptual assessment may be something that is indicated in terms of testing for this child. And then it's very important to remember that a visual perceptual dysfunction is not solely a pediatric problem. So first of all, you could have untreated patients that had this problem in their younger ages and it was never treated and never got any better. But then you also have patients with a history of traumatic brain injury, stroke, lesions, tumors, demyelinating disorders, head trauma, concussion, neurodegenerative diseases, and even some psychological disorders, which can all interfere with visual and perceptual processing. And these are going to limit the patient's quality of life, their activities of daily living, and their job performance and their social interactions. All right, so now that we've gone through kind of the basics of visual information processing, we're going to start talking about the actual testing, and we're going to just go over the testing basics for everything until before we dive into the actual tests themselves. So the visual perceptual examination evaluates the ability and the efficiency of the visual information processing ability of a patient, their ability to interpret, to understand, to recall, as well as to utilize the visual information. It also looks at the patient's ability to link the vision to language. Also, it's important to remember that many of these tests require proof of an advanced degree before being able to purchase and perform these tests, and optometrists are one of the healthcare providers that are qualified to perform the tests. When you perform the tests, the results can be utilized in the office to evaluate for the need for therapy. A report can be written to other healthcare providers to help with interprofessional care for the patient, for the teacher, for any adjustments the doctor may recommend in the classroom based on the testing, and also to the school board to help incorporate an individualized education plan or other accommodation for the student based on the testing. Some practitioners may perform a small battery of tests after treatment to evaluate the progression made, but we have to be careful here because there is a learning